News 2 investigates contaminated soil, plus results after our report last night.
It's an invisible problem. We call it a hidden poison in the city.
But it's hidden no more. The East Baton Rouge Parish School System will test the soil of all 85 schools in the district.
It comes after our News 2 investigation found high levels of lead and arsenic at some schools. A researcher from LSU used the device you are about to see to test the soil of about a dozen schools. He found levels of arsenic or lead above the EPA limit at Westdale Elementary School, Glen Oaks Park, Delmont, South Downs, the Visual and Performing Arts Center, Lehigh, and Westminster Elementary. Most are older buildings. The testing could start as early as next week.
We're working with LSU Ag Center to do evaluations at all of our schools, and in those areas where we find elevated levels of contaminants, we're going to do more significant testing to really work to see what the significance of it is.
In New Orleans, parks were closed when this problem was uncovered there. And new at 10 o'clock, News 2's Rosa Flores gets answers on how that problem was fixed and who paid for it.
When people say New Orleans, many think the sights and sounds of the French Quarter.
Look it up, there you go, oh, there you go.
But a Tulane researcher thinks about the shades of red on this map. The darker the red, the more contaminated the area.
You look at the soil, you don't realize that it might be contaminated.
Dr. Howard Milkey has collected thousands of samples over 2 decades, and his findings are very clear.
What we notice is a very strong relationship. Children who, especially about 3 years old, are putting their hands in the mouth all the time. They're picking up materials from the environment, and unfortunately, if it's high lead soil, they get exposed very easily.
So much so, children like little Josie got sick. Her pediatrician tested her blood. The lead level in her blood was 18, 8 points above the limit set by the CDC.
And it turned out that the paint on the windowsills was turning to dust, literally. So you didn't see chips, it was airborne.
Lead is known to cause learning disabilities, so she immediately moved out of her house, but ended up living and playing with Josie near Markey Park. Later, she found out it was one of the most contaminated areas in New Orleans.
And that was the environment that I was taking my child to while I was trying to help her. So her elevation levels went up.
Having children tested based on what they find in the soil.
Hess, other parents, and Dr. Milkey formed a support group and contacted news reporters. The city of New Orleans ended up closing 11 public parks.
The city responded remarkably well.
They remediated all 11 parks at a cost of about $94,000 of city money.
And they cleaned it up in a very simple way. They put a geotextile down and then clean soil on the top of that.
The orange material that is being laid down in these pictures is geotextile. It allows water to drain through, but it doesn't allow contaminated dirt to come back up. So where is all this lead coming from? The main source, leaded gasoline. Dr. Milkey will tell you, every urban city he has looked at has elevated levels of lead along well-trafficked streets.
And that's universal. Every place that lead and gasoline was used, blood lead levels went up. When they took lead out of gasoline, blood lead levels went down. We succeeded in getting lead out of gasoline, but we didn't get it out of our environment. It's still there.
To keep track of lead soil safety, the EPA set a standard.
The EPA lead limit is at 400 parts per million, but according to the research done by Dr. Milkey here in the city of New Orleans, that lead limit should be much lower.
It's a total dogma. Very little research by EPA. They're using a mechanical approach to, they're trying to think of the number of hours that kids might play outside, how much lead they get on their hands. It's so easy to manipulate the formulas that are being used.
He did his own research in New Orleans and found that 25% of children living in areas of the city with soil lead levels as low as 100 parts per million had elevated lead levels, and there's more. He also mapped blood lead levels and school performance. Turns out the higher the lead levels in soil, the lower the test scores. The danger, he says, Unless you test the soil, you just don't know.
If there were little skull and bold signs on the soil that was contaminated, then they'd say, oh, I guess I better stay away from this. But that's not the case.
That, of course, until Dr. Milky created a map of New Orleans like this one, showing dangerous locations and the safe places to have fun.
Now, Dr. Milky will tell you it's difficult to find money to pay for soil cleanup. You see, the U.S. has a Clean Air Act and a Clean Water Act, but no Clean Soil Act. So finding funds to pay for remediation is usually difficult. At the end of the day, he does say that the owner of the property is responsible for the cleanup. So Sylvia and Michael, a lot of the times what's difficult is finding out that there's a problem.
So the final question, I guess, is how did New Orleans actually pay for this remediation?
Well, in New Orleans, there's a three-prong approach. Right now, Dr. Milky is remediating private properties with private funds. The city of New Orleans remediated public parks with money from their Environment Improvement Fund. Those are city funds. And now the feds are remediating HUD properties. So there's a way to pay for it, just sometimes it takes a little work. Rosa Flores, WBRZ, Balance News.
All right, Rosa.